Welcome to the podcast on North American literature, hosted by the research group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada. I'm Virginia, and today we will have here a student who have researched about the flirt in the American novel. Welcome, Rocío.
Thank you so much, Virginia. I'm very grateful to have space here to talk about my work.
We are even more thankful for your agreement to participate in our podcast. I'd like you to give our listeners a little context on the authors around which you center your research.
Alright, so throughout the American novel, feminine characters who had exhibited flirtatious behavior, often young, attractive, and with socially transgressive attitudes, have been vilified and damned to fatal fate. Hannah Webster Foster's The Coquette, or The History of Eliza Wharton, a novel founded on fact, and Henry James' Daisy Miller study, both play part in the literary American tradition as they both construct the image of the flirt within their respective historical and cultural contexts, illustrating gendered social dynamics. The Coquette is a late 18th century epistolary novel, as its full title hints, founded on fact. The fact factor made this work suitable for the epoch, an early American society which used enlightened models to build up an emerging national identity. Therefore, Enlightenment advocated moral values such as decency, simplicity, chastity, and honesty, all of them broken by coquettish Eliza. So, dramatic irony among our later discussed literary tools is what pushes the plot forward, as the reader already knows a real-life story. Morbid details are what keep up the interest. Then, Daisy Miller is a 19th century modernist novel which explores the clash between American innocence and European sophistication through psychologically complex characters. This portrayal of psychological depth inserts the book inside realism, although it can also be tagged as a naturalistic novel. Daisy wants to escape its social conventions, as she can't manage to fit in the sphere of Europeanized American travels. So, in a very Darwinistic way, she cannot escape death.
Oh wow, but isn't there a huge time gap between both novels?
Yeah, indeed. Despite being written almost a century apart, the conflict underlying the Coquette and Daisy Miller is strikingly similar. A young woman's desire for personal freedom challenges rigid social codes and gendered expectations. The characters of Eliza Wharton and Daisy Miller function as narrative vessels through which boundaries of acceptable womanhood are engaged, ending both in tragedy. Therefore, the trope of the flirt embodies critical reassessment of how literature has historically portrayed femininity and morality. The comparison between these narratives aims to reveal the persistent tension between the woman's public autonomy and her moral valuation by society, whether in an early republicanism context or an Europeanized one, as I said before. So, these last ideas led me to try to apply a feminist critical view to both readings.
I'm really looking forward to knowing more about the feminist critical approach you mentioned at last.
It's the best part, you'll see.
Nice. Now, how is a flirt? I mean, how can we identify one?
Okay, so before anything, trigger warning, I'm going to cite both primary and secondary sources in order to illustrate what I'm explaining. So let's start with a 2020 article written by Conway, where she states precisely the characteristics to look at when trying to identify a flirt. So, she must express an awareness that she is engaging in flirtatious behavior. She must be recognized as a flirt by other members of her community, and crucially, she must favor flirtation as its own end rather than only using flirtation as a means of obtaining a social or economic goal, she states. So, The first feature raises an interesting difference between Eliza and Daisy. Eliza is fully conscious of her flirtation. This is seen in letter 3, when she asks, "Is it time for me to talk again on my conquest? Or must I only enjoy them in silence?" Something similar is seen in letter 5. "These bewitching charms of mine, I am so pestered by these admirers. I am certainly very much a taste of the other sex," she says. So she deliberately addresses the word conquest. She is fully aware of what she's doing to these men. On the other hand, Daisy's projection through Winterbourne's character shows she's unconsciously flirting, fitting the young American girl prototype, as the male character expresses in the reading too. He says, "Such things seemed a kind of demonstrative evidence of a certain laxity of deportment. He had become dishabituated to the American tone. After all, American girls were exceedingly innocent, as Daisy is." So, another feature that adds to this idea is the use of natural imagery, as Dunbar in 1950 suggests the innocent naturalness of her behavior. Right? So, the most obvious example is her name, related to whiteness, Daisy, is purity and innocence. Later, Winterbourne explicitly describes her as a flirt, a pretty American flirt. This is related to the second feature Conway was pointing out. Other people recognize the flirt as such. Eliza is also told off, although the term coquette is replacing the term flirt in letter 2. Eliza replies to a letter written by Lizzie, and by its content, the reader assumes she had warned her friend about her behavior, as it reads, "I shall never again resume those airs which you term coquettish." So, scholars such as Binken in 2015 and Kaya 2002 exchanged the terms flirt and coquette as synonymous, although the name which has canonically remained in the literary tradition is the former one. Lastly, flirting as a source of mere enjoyment is also noticeable, related to the repeated liking for the works, with men in both works. In letter 5, Eliza describes how they work together, and she adapted her conversation to the taste of her gallant. So, in the same letter, although Eliza tells Lucy she must try to be serious and find one serious lover, this is just false humility. She still enjoys male attention, as she wants to gratify her natural disposition in a participation of those pleasures which youth, and innocence afford. So she basically wants to have a good time, and that's all. And despite flirting with Mr. Boyer, she still ends up flirting with Major Sanford. In the case of Daisy, she is seen walking along with Winterbourne, Eugenio, and Mr. Giovanelli, which is fuel for gossiping, such as when Mr. Walker replied to Winterbourne after he questioned what her Daisy had done. So Mrs. Walker says, "Everything that is not done here," flirting with any man she could pick up, sitting in the corners with mysterious Italians, dancing all the evening with the same partners.
Wow, if I read those books, I wouldn't realize all those small details.
It's not as hard as you think.
And now tell us, how are those characters constructed? I mean, in stylistics terms.
Well, characterization is achieved through perspectivism, also known as multiplicality. Not to be redundant, but basically multiple voices of the different characters in the reading. But it is constructed in different ways depending on the style. Because remember, we have epistolary form versus narrative form in this case. So, firstly, when it comes to the Coquette, the reading feels realistic not only because of the content, but also because of the style. Epistolary novelists commonly blur the lines between fiction and reality by including morsels of information that seems to be about their real life, as Patch states in her article. Therefore, epistolary style allows for multiple viewpoints as characters can write letters to each other or reflect individually, which adds depth and complexity to the narrative. So the perspectivism is primarily achieved through letters exchanged between Eliza and Lucy, as well as Mr. Boyes and Mr. Harley Wins, which characterize Eliza as polyedric, as what she said about public events and about her private feelings clash. Therefore, the tension between public-private is also crucial for the plot. Not only her private feelings are immoral, as she is happy because of her husband's death, but the juxtaposition of Lucy's voice as a foil or a more morally correct character enhance even more her negative portrayal. This is read when she says she was more encouraged when she saw his declining health. This is the declining health of her husband. So also she mocks her mother when she writes her consent of her state upon the recent events. This is read in she praises my fortitude and admires a philosophy which I have asserted under what she calls my heavy bereavement. Poor woman! Other sentiments and passion make but a transient impression. So she searches for pleasure and enjoyment, even ignoring Lucy's rational advice, denying she's behaving coquettishly. This is read in it is now that I begin to descend in the busy sense and active pleasures of life returning. I have received your letter, your moral lecture, rather. I believe I shall never again resume those airs which you term coquettish, but I think I deserve a softer appellation as they proceed from an innocent heart. Right? So polysyndeton is also repeatedly used in the reading, which adds up to the idea of immediacy and lifelike sense, as if the events told flowed through the unending sentences and as if a real friend were texting or writing to the reader, but still Eliza writes to Lucy. So the reader at a different diegetic level has direct access to this intimacy. This is indeed totally morbid and attractive. On the other hand, Daisy Miller is focalized through the protagonist and narrator, Winterbourne. Therefore, the reader achieves a realistic feeling as one accesses both action and the mind of the male character. This perception of consciousness and psychological depth fits into the modernist realism of the epoch. The reader only meets her through what others characters say about her. This is Winterburn's superficial descriptions and Mrs. Costello and Mrs. Walker's disapproval and gossip. For example, she was strikingly admirable pretty, thought Winterburn. As Daisy is an unmarried woman who wanders along with a career she is extremely criticized. Mrs. Costello states it's a pity to let the girl ruin herself. Nevertheless, contrary to Lizzie, she ends up insulting her, so her initial concern ends up being kind of fake.
Interesting. You said before the Coquette is a novel founded on fact. Could you elaborate on this idea more?
Exactly. In the Coquette, dramatic irony is the narrative force moving forward the plot. Despite the epistolary form intensifies a very similar effect due to the factors stated before, still the author has made up the details absent from the real story. This is, the reader knows the real story, but what maintains attention is the desire to see specific morbid details, and there is no better way to do it than through a confessionary style, enabling the reader to access a privacy they could never achieve. All this combined enables the author to kill two birds with one stone. Not only reader's interest remains, but also confessionary style allows moral judgment. What's more, the reader feels morally superior to Eliza, as she cannot be driven by fact or reason. This comes clear when Mr. Boyer states that the cure for blind passion is to be a reasonable creature. Dramatic irony is accompanied by anticipation. So, to build up tension, Eliza comes across endless alibis which she even manages to recognize as some kind of prophecy, but still she acts the same. So, anticipation or foreshadowing is another literary tool read in Daisy Miller. Nevertheless, the intended effect is different. Whilst in Watson's novel it favors dramatic irony as readers already know the ending, in James' novel it builds up dramatic tension. So, at first reading, one may not notice the swing towards the ending of the story, as Daisy says she should spire if she cannot walk anymore. She would indeed not be able to walk anymore in her death. So this lack of mobility will be later related to social mobility in the feminist critical approach. Taking this into account, her death results ironic and kind of ridiculous as she contracts malaria during a walk in Rome with Mr. Giovanelli. As the reader despises Eliza and feels morally superior to her, when her tragic ending comes, the reader is satisfied. Nevertheless, this ending, contrary to Daisy Miller's case, is not a narrative artifice, it is based on a real event. Contrary, Daisy Miller's tragical fate is due to the author's craft. Daisy Miller is a fictional story, but realistic as it dives into the psychological depth of its characters. Their representation is plausible, therefore the style is realistic. Some historical context is needed to understand the reading, alright? So, in the late 19th century, the US saw a great affluency of immigration. This is Europeans going to America for work. In that sense, Bebe will be then an allegory of the American reality of the time as diverse nationalities coexist, such as neat German waiters, Russian princesses sitting in the garden, little Polish boys walking about. So old Americans in Bebe are so Europeanized that they have almost lost their American identity. That is why Winterbourne himself realizes he had been out of America for too long, that he's scandalized by Daisy's behavior. He even uses too much French words, which kind of caricaturizes and ridiculizes him as they are juxtaposed. So it produces a disruptive and unfamiliar effect, right? So for example, we can read inconduite, tournure, attaché, trois corons. As British at the time were studying French and Italian, this was a sign of sophistication and cosmopolitanism that only the rich had the opportunity to do. So, Daisy will be then representing America as the motherland is female, young because of the recent founding of the United States. Daisy's psychological portrait can be read as a symbol of the true America, innocent, fresh, joyful, but unfitting is this in this sophisticated space. This had led to extensive criticism against the novel, but still, many pitied Daisy's death, and James' depiction of Europeanized Americans is caricature-like. What is more interesting, her real name is Annie, but she wants to be called Daisy. Daisies are common and cheap flowers, delicate and weak. Annie's character uses a persona for the tourist adventures in Baby, but she ends up being herself. She's honest. The reader gets a projection of Daisy through the male gaze, through Winterbourne. So Winterbourne names is also symbolic, as born meant boundary or limit at the time according to the OED. Therefore, this limited access to Daisy's character makes her, as is called before, a blurry and polyedric character. Her honest and straightforward personality comes clear when she speaks through dark speech. It is important to point out that between the Coquette and Daisy Miller, romanticism occurs. As a naturalistic characters, Daisy illustrate a female development of romantic hero. This is supported thanks to what has been discussed before. This is Daisy is an outcast in a Europeanized cosmopolitan American society, as she goes against the strict societal boundaries incarnated by those sophisticated characters in the book. This is Winterbourne, Mrs. Costello, Mrs. Walker. Despite being born in America too, Europeanized characters always see Daisy as exotic, as she is always an American girl. Because of these, the reader can sympathize with the flirt. This is sympathetic with Daisy's death, right? So, despite not being able to escape commonness or death, she died true to herself, just as Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost is punished but remains true to his own ideas. Contrary to her, Eliza is easily judged, and her death feels right for her, as mentioned before.
You made such an interesting point there. That's amazing.
What's more amazing is what I'm going to explain next. Considering Daisy's female development of romantic hero, a feminist critical approach can be applied to redefine the image of the flirt. Firstly, the reader's access to Daisy is always mediated by the male gaze of Winterbourne, the homodiegetic narrator. Homodiegetic narrators are less reliable than omniscient heterodiegetic narrators, as their voice is subjective. Then, rescuing perspectivism, the multivocality of the novel is either masculine or misogynistic in the case of other feminine characters, such as Mrs. Walker and Mrs. Costello. For European patriarchism of the 19th century, Daisy is a challenged girl, as she's a single woman who brags about her many male friends in America, goes on walks all alone with men, expresses freely and spontaneously, breaking with prototypical European woman incarnated in The Angel in the House by Coventry Patmore. So female figures fitting this prototype are shallow, upholding the system which oppresses them, even openly portrayed as passive and weak. This is not a surprise because of the inexistence of the notions feminism and sorority for that time. So, for example, Mrs. Costello is said to have a headache every 2 days. So Barnett in 1979 interestingly points out that those women who accept their circumscribed existence pay varying prices of neurotic illnesses. Mrs. Walker is restricted to small spaces, as social boundaries are claustrophobic and a source of health problems for women, as seen in the description of her little crimson room. So, Mrs. Walker's name would also hide a symbolic and ironic meaning. She is enclosed to those little spaces and criticizes Daisy for doing otherwise. Nevertheless, Daisy defends the importance of those walks, as she says, "If I didn't walk, I should spire." So, walking implies emotion in contrast to the rigid social boundaries. It is interesting to remember Winterbourne's symbolic name. He is a definer and enforcer of the burn of societal property. He's the one writing the study on Daisy. Daisy stops walking when she spies or dies. This is the success of those restraining boundaries incarnated in Winterbourne. Though Winterbourne's character is hypocritical, he quickly scandalizes because of Daisy's relationship with men, but he says he met 2 or 3 women who were great coquettes. Basically, he is not condemned for doing the same thing, which makes the 21st century reader realize the double standards in such society. Daisy openly says she has never allowed a gentleman to dictate or interfere with anything she says or she does. So, the 21st century reader notices all these details. Juxtaposition of female characters and foils now make the reader see the contrast between Daisy's desire for freedom
with the confinement of other women in artificial tribal spheres. Then, symbolic and ironic names, focal narration, and Daisy's polyedric characterization allows a reinterpretation of the reading as progressive, dying Daisy not only as female naturalistic character, but also a woman who always remained honest to her own feelings and thoughts. This is unexplored psychological complexity by older characters makes Daisy a likable character, pitying her death. In the case of the Coquette, Eliza is encoded similarly to Daisy as they both break with the patriarchal norm, advocated freedom and enjoyment. But as the novel was written before Romanticism and therefore deeply inserted in the Leiden moral code, Eliza's psyche is no attractive for the reader. Her portrayal is deliberately unflattering, selfish, interested. Another thing that can be highlighted, absent in Daisy Miller, is the fact that there's a female protagonist expressing her own voice, confessing her feelings, but still, everything she talks about is men. So it cannot be further commented, as Jane's writing style allows a 21st century interpretation supporting progressive views of women, something that Wharton's style prevents from happening.
I love how certain details can make a total difference.
Yeah, by comparing the Coquette and Daisy Miller, readers can trace the literary tradition of the Flirt American novel. Though the reader should always watch out that Eliza and Daisy stand at opposite ends of a literary and cultural spectrum, one rooted in enlightened morality and the other in modernism, occurring romanticism between them. Eliza is shaped and judged through the confessional tone of the epistolary form, rendering her a cautionary tale whose fate, despite being based on a real story, satisfies a culturally imposed sense of justice based on reason or fact. Daisy, in contrast, is mediated almost entirely through a focal male narration and social gossip. Yet her honesty and spontaneity and inconformity imbue her character with a romantic heroism that challenges the boundaries of social propriety. Both novels use perspectivism or multiplicality to project the flirt, but whilst Eliza's interiority becomes a site for moral scrutiny, Daisy's ambiguity becomes a space for resistance and reinterpretation. The tragic endings are interpreted either as an affirmation of a didactic moral order or a questioning of it. Viewed from a feminist critical lens, Daisy emerges as a more progressive and enduring figure than Eliza because she's always resisting any male influence and doesn't want any man to say what she can do, whilst Eliza purposely changes her attitude to please Mrs. Boyer. So, for the first century reader, Daisy's death is even more pitiful as she's interpreted as the victory of the harsh social morality. She cannot walk or be free anymore. She's static forever.
It is a great honor to have such specialized researchers in our research team. Thank you so much for coming here today.
The honor is totally mine. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you so much, Virginia.
I'm sure they did. Please subscribe and share. We will have more interesting researchers collaborating with us in upcoming podcasts. See you soon!